I could feel every heavy second inside that family courtroom air pressing against my swollen belly. 8 months pregnant, my dress stretched tight across my midsection, both hands resting lightly over the curve as I sat at the plaintiff's table. I had showed up ready for divorce proceedings, prepared to lay out the papers, to state on record why my marriage to Ethan could no longer go on. I thought I knew what hardship looked like. I thought I had braced myself for every ugly thing this day might bring. The gallery behind me held a small handful of onlookers, a couple of court observers, a few random people waiting for their own cases to be called. Ethan sat across the narrow aisle, shoulders squared, wearing the crisp button-down he always pulled out for important appearances. His expression was calm, almost weary, the performance of a wronged husband. His lawyer leaned in to murmur something to him, and he nodded slowly. I kept my gaze forward, trying to focus on Judge Voss, who sat high up on the bench flipping through our case file. I told myself, just get through this hearing, get the temporary orders set, protect the baby. That was all I needed. Then the heavy wooden door at the back of the room crashed open. Footsteps clicked fast across the tile floor. I heard gasps ripple through the gallery before I even turned my head. Sabrina Hale pushed past the wooden railing separating spectators from the court floor. Her dark hair was messy, her face flushed, and her eyes locked straight onto me. I registered the shock before fear fully landed. I had seen her in photos, Ethan's old texts, but I had never stood in the same room as her. She was the other woman, the person who had been sleeping with my husband while I carried his child. Security started moving toward her, but she closed the distance in 2 long strides before anyone could intercept. No warning speech, no shouting argument. Her palm connected hard against my cheek. It was nothing like the dramatic slaps you see in television. There was no slow motion. There was only a sharp hiss of displaced air right before impact. Pain exploded across the side of my face, hot and throbbing, radiating down my jaw. My head snapped hard to one side. The sound echoed, bouncing off the high courtroom walls. I tasted copper immediately, blood welling at the corner of my lip. Before my mind could process what had just happened, both my hands flew down, pressing firm over my belly, my whole body tensing, terrified the shock would trigger something bad for the baby underneath my skin. Chaos erupted all around. Chairs scraped. People stood up. Court security officers lunged, grabbing Sabrina by both arms, yanking her backward. She fought against their grip, still screaming insults toward me, her voice cracking with rage. Through the ringing in my ear, I heard Judge Voss's voice boom out from the bench, sharp and unyielding over the noise. "Bailiff, seal this courtroom immediately. Clear all non-essential spectators. No one enters, no one leaves." A murmur of confusion swelled. I could hear people protesting as they were being escorted out the door. The public gallery emptied fast. The heavy door clicked shut, locking behind the last observer. Now only court staff, our legal teams. Ethan, Sabrina, and I remained inside the closed room. My cheek burned so badly I could barely think straight. I kept one hand anchored to my stomach, the other gingerly touching my throbbing face, my fingertips coming away faintly damp with blood. I glanced across at Ethan. This was his mistress, the woman he had chosen behind my back. Part of me expected him to show horror, to step forward, to condemn what she had just done. Instead, he sat frozen in his chair. His jaw tightened, and he looked away, staring at the floor, avoiding my eyes entirely. He did not say a single word of outrage toward Sabrina. He did not check whether I or our unborn child was hurt. He only adjusted his tie, like he was worried about how this incident would reflect on him. My attorney leaned over toward me, voice lowered, asking whether I needed medical attention. Whether I felt any cramping? I barely answered him. My mind kept replaying that split second when Sabrina's hand hit my face. Up until today, I had framed this whole divorce as paperwork, arguments over assets, legal dates. I had believed all the danger lived in emails and text messages. I had fooled myself into thinking physical violence would never touch my life inside a government courtroom. Judge Voss ordered Sabrina, held by security, off to the side while she addressed the room. The closed-door environment was supposed to shield me from public spectacle. But as I sat there, cheek throbbing, heart hammering against my ribs, I understood something terrifying. Sabrina was not just a jealous woman making empty threats. She was willing to hurt a pregnant person in front of witnesses. And Ethan, my husband, the father of my baby, would not stand up to protect us. The whole quiet future I had imagined for my child and me felt suddenly fragile, hanging by a thread inside this locked courtroom. The sealed courtroom hummed with a tense, suffocating silence after the chaos faded. Sabrina stood pinned between 2 bailiffs, her chest heaving, eyes still blazing with unspent fury. The fight had drained her of composure, but not of resentment. Every rigid line of her body promised she wasn't done confronting me. Judge Voss stared down at all of us from the bench, her gaze sharp enough to cut through the lingering tension. No trace of leniency in her tone. "This court will not tolerate assault of any kind, especially against a vulnerable litigant who is 8 months pregnant," she said firmly, her voice steady and authoritative. Ms. Hale, you will remain in custody pending a temporary restraining order review. Any further outbursts will result in immediate contempt charges. Sabrina's jaw clenched, but she finally fell silent, her glare never leaving my face. I dabbed at the corner of my mouth with a crumpled court tissue, the metallic taste of blood still clinging to my tongue. My cheek was swelling fast, tight and hot to the touch, and a dull, constant ache had settled low in my abdomen, faint enough to not warrant emergency care, but strong enough to keep me terrified for my baby. My lawyer, Ms. Carter, jotted fast notes on her legal pad, her brow furrowed with quiet urgency. Once the judge turned her attention to procedural matters, Ethan finally lifted his head. He turned to me with that soft, practiced look of remorse he'd perfected over years of small betrayals, the same look that had made me forgive his late nights, his vague excuses, his growing distance long before I uncovered the affair. When he spoke, his voice was low and gentle, designed to sound earnest and regretful. Lila, I'm so sorry. I had no idea she'd do something like this. This isn't who I am, you know that. I stared at him, numb. For months I'd clung to a tiny, stupid hope that deep down, he still cared about me, about our baby. That the affair was a terrible mistake, not a deliberate choice to abandon his family. But watching him sit there, calm and unshaken after I'd been assaulted because of his choices, I felt the last thread of that hope snap clean in two. You knew she was unstable, I said quietly, my voice hoarse from shock. You just didn't care enough to stop her before she hurt me. His expression flickered, guilt flitting across his face before he masked it with frustration, shifting the blame effortlessly. I tried to handle it privately. I didn't want to drag you into more stress during your pregnancy. I was protecting you. Ms. Carter cut in before I could reply, her tone crisp and professional, shutting down his manipulative deflection. Mr. Marlowe, your personal attempts to manage this situation are irrelevant. Your associate just committed assault in a public court proceeding. Our priority now is securing full protection for Ms. Marlowe and her unborn child. The rest of the hearing moved in a blurry rush of legal jargon. Judge Voss granted a temporary no-contact order against Sabrina, barring her from approaching me, my residence, or any location I frequented. The order was active immediately, but it was only temporary, valid for just 14 days, with a full hearing scheduled to determine if it would become permanent. It was a small victory, but a fragile one, and I knew it wouldn't be enough to keep me safe for long. What unsettled me most was Ethan's consistent minimization of the entire incident. He told the judge Sabrina had acted out of emotional distress, that she'd been misled about the state of our marriage, that her actions were impulsive and unrepresentative of her character. He never once acknowledged that his lies, his ongoing affair, his refusal to end things cleanly, had fueled her obsession and violence. To hear him speak, he was the unfortunate victim of two conflicting women, caught in the middle of a messy situation he'd never intended to create. When the hearing adjourned, and the courtroom finally unlocked, reporters and onlookers lingered outside the doors, murmuring and craning their necks to catch a glimpse of the drama inside. I kept my head down, letting Ms. Carter guide me toward the exit, my hand never leaving my stomach. I didn't want anyone's stares, anyone's sympathy, anyone's questions. I just wanted to get somewhere safe. I texted my best friend Mia the second I stepped into the courthouse parking lot. I need you. Court got violent. I'm okay but scared. Minutes later she called, her voice tight with worry, already grabbing her keys to come pick me up. Ethan followed me out into the bright midday sun, falling into step beside me as I waited for Mia. He lowered his voice, shifting from remorseful to persuasive, his tone sharp with underlying pressure. Lila, let's talk privately. This whole thing got out of hand. If we settle the divorce amicably, no contested assets, no public filings dragging everyone through the mud, I can make sure Sabrina backs off for good. I'll handle her. I stopped walking and turned to face him, my swollen cheek throbbing with every heartbeat. You can't handle her. You couldn't even stop her from slapping me in front of a judge. You just watched. His expression hardened, the mask of regret slipping for the first time to reveal his true priorities. I'm trying to protect both of us from more chaos. Don't let your pride ruin a fair settlement for you and the baby. He walked away before I could respond, climbing into his truck and peeling out of the parking lot without a second glance back. Minutes later, Mia's car pulled up. Her face creased with alarm when she saw my bruised, swollen cheek. I climbed into the passenger seat, finally letting myself breathe, the weight of the morning crashing over me all at once. But just as Mia pulled out of the parking spot, my phone vibrated in my purse. It was an unknown number, no caller ID. I hesitated, then unlocked the screen to see a short, chilling text. You can't hide behind judges and court orders. I know where you're going next. My blood ran cold the second I read that anonymous text. I stared at the screen for a long, frozen moment, my fingers trembling slightly as Mia merged onto the highway, glancing over at me with growing concern. What's wrong? She asked, her voice urgent. "Lila, you look like you've seen a ghost." I turned my phone toward her, letting her read the message. Her eyes widened instantly, her grip tightening on the steering wheel. "That's Sabrina, no question. She's already violating the spirit of the restraining order before it's even officially filed." I deleted the text, but the words burned into my memory, unshakable. "She knows where I am, or where I'm about to be." "I don't know how." Mia didn't hesitate. "You're staying with me. No arguments. My place is gated, quiet, no random people lingering around. You and the baby are safe there." I nodded, exhausted and terrified, too drained to fight. I'd planned to stay in my small rental apartment through the end of my pregnancy, familiar and comfortable. But that space felt vulnerable now, too easy to find, too unprotected. Mia's suburban townhouse was a safe haven, far from the courthouse and Ethan's neighborhood, and I knew I needed to take every possible precaution. By the time we arrived at her home, my cheek was darkening into a deep purple bruise, and the low abdominal cramping I'd felt all morning had grown more persistent. I sent a photo of my injury to Ms. Carter immediately, along with a screenshot of the anonymous threat text. My lawyer called me within minutes, her tone firm and focused. "This changes everything," she told me. "We're pushing for a permanent restraining order, full surveillance of any contact attempts, and we're adding emotional distress and endangerment to your case. This isn't just a divorce dispute anymore, it's harassment and potential fetal endangerment." Relief washed over me. For the first time all day, someone was taking my fear seriously, refusing to downplay the danger I was facing. But Ms. Carter's next words grounded me in the harsh reality of legal battles. "The downside is this will drag the case out longer. Contested restraining order hearings mean more court dates, more back and forth filings, more stress during your final trimester. To prioritize your safety and the baby's well-being, we'll need to concede on some minor asset claims temporarily to keep the court's focus on protection." I closed my eyes, understanding the cost of my safety. I'd spent months fighting for a fair split of our joint savings, for partial ownership of the marital vehicle, for every small financial security I could secure for my baby's future. Now I would have to set that fight aside, sacrificing short-term financial gain for immediate safety. It was a painful choice, but an easy one. Nothing mattered more than protecting my child. That night, Ethan texted me repeatedly, his messages shifting between fake concern and subtle pressure. He asked how I was feeling, claimed he'd heard about the threat text, offered to talk Sabrina down if I agreed to drop the contested restraining order. He insisted the legal battle would only harm the baby. That unnecessary stress was worse for me than letting the incident go unpunished. I didn't reply to a single message. For years, I'd been the compromising one in our marriage, the one who smoothed over conflict, who forgave mistakes, who prioritized peace over justice. No more. I was done protecting him from the consequences of his choices. Late that evening, my body finally reacted to the day's trauma. Sharp, rhythmic cramping doubled me over on Mia's couch, and she rushed me to the local urgent care. The nurses checked my vitals, monitored the baby's heartbeat, and confirmed I was experiencing severe stress-induced contractions, early labor warnings, triggered by the assault and ongoing harassment. The doctor pulled me aside, her tone serious. "You need absolute rest, minimal stress, and zero conflict for the next few weeks. Any further trauma could push you into preterm labor, and your baby is not ready to be born yet. You have to protect yourself." Those words solidified my resolve completely. I would not back down, would not compromise my safety, would not let Ethan's manipulation or Sabrina's threats break me. The next morning, Ms. Carter filed the full restraining order petition, including medical documentation of my stress-induced labor symptoms and the threatening text message as evidence. But Ethan's legal team fought back instantly, filing an emergency response that painted me as the volatile, unreasonable party. They claimed I was fabricating threats to gain leverage in the divorce, that my cramping was a normal part of late-stage pregnancy, that I was weaponizing my pregnancy to destroy Ethan's reputation and ruin Sabrina's life. When I read their filing, sitting alone in Mia's quiet guest room, I felt a sharp, burning anger bubble up, my first real burst of rage since the assault. I'd spent months hurting quietly, grieving my broken marriage, fearing for my baby's future, and they were painting me as the villain. I texted Ethan one final message. "No longer soft, no longer pleading. I'm not compromising my safety for your reputation. The truth will come out." Seconds later, my phone pinged with a new court alert. The judge had scheduled the permanent restraining order hearing in just 5 days, and Ethan's legal team was already gathering witnesses to testify against me. The quiet, safe reprieve I'd fought for was about to explode into an even uglier battle. The days leading up to the restraining order hearing blurred into a cycle of anxiety, doctor's visits, and constant legal updates. I stayed confined to Mia's townhouse, following doctor's orders to rest as much as possible, but peace felt impossible to grasp. Every notification from my phone made me jump. Every distant car passing the driveway made me tense. Every unfamiliar sound sent my mind racing to worst-case scenarios. Mia never complained, but I could feel the strain of my presence wearing on her. She worked full-time as a registered nurse, pulling long, exhausting hospital double shifts, and coming home to care for a traumatized 8-month pregnant friend had upended her entire routine. She rearranged her schedule to drive me to appointments, picked up my groceries, sat up late with me when I couldn't sleep, and never once asked for anything in return. But small, unavoidable cracks began to show in our perfect support system. She started leaving dishes in the sink overnight, too tired to clean after her shifts. She stopped asking how I was feeling, her usual warm check-ins fading into quiet, distracted greetings. She spent more time on her phone in the evenings, stepping outside to take private calls, her voice lowered so I couldn't hear the conversation. My already frayed nerves twisted into paranoia. I misread every small change in her behavior, convincing myself she was growing tired of my drama, my fear, my constant need for protection. I told myself I was burdening her, ruining her peaceful life with my messy, violent divorce crisis. The last thing I wanted was to drain the only person who still had my back. Isolated and overstressed, I made a desperate misjudgment. I pulled back from Mia, forcing myself to be quieter, more independent, less needy. I stopped telling her when I was scared or cramping. I stopped asking for help with small tasks. I pretended I was coping better than I was, convinced I was protecting our friendship by not burdening her further. In reality, I was pushing my only support system away when I needed it most. While I withdrew into my own fear, Ethan and his team kept pushing forward with their strategy to discredit me. They tracked down former coworkers and mutual acquaintances, reaching out to people who'd known us during our marriage, gathering minor, out-of-context comments to paint me as bitter, unforgiving, and emotionally unstable. One of our old mutual friends agreed to testify on Ethan's behalf, claiming I'd always been overly sensitive during our marriage, that I'd picked fights over small issues, that my current distress was just an escalation of my usual emotional pattern. The statement was a gross distortion of the truth, but it carried weight in court. A neutral third party seemingly corroborating Ethan's narrative, Sabrina, meanwhile, stayed completely silent on social media and in public, no longer sending threatening texts or making aggressive moves. Her absence felt more terrifying than her anger. It was the quiet before a bigger storm, a deliberate pause to make her seem calm and reformed for the upcoming hearing. Ms. Carter warned me repeatedly about their strategy. They're painting Sabrina as a remorseful, misled woman, and you as an overreacting, vengeful wife. Her silence is calculated. They want the judge to believe the courtroom slap was a one-time mistake, fueled by your marital conflict, not evidence of ongoing danger. I wanted to believe her, but doubt crept in anyway. Without Mia's full emotional support, without anyone to ground me, I started second-guessing every choice I'd made. Had I overreacted to the text threat? Was I dragging this out unnecessarily? Would the judge see me as the problem, not the victim? By the fourth night of staying with Mia, the tension between us peaked. She came home late from a double shift, exhausted and irritable, and found me pacing the living room, unable to sleep. My hands clamped tight around my belly. "I just need this to be over," I whispered, my voice breaking. "I hate that I'm ruining your life." Mia froze, her face softening instantly. "Lila, you're not ruining my life. I'm just tired. I've been covering extra shifts to keep my mind off how scared I am for you. I wasn't pulling away from you. I was stressed and overwhelmed." In that moment, I realized my terrible mistake. I'd isolated myself for no reason, let my paranoia create a rift in the only solid relationship I had left. We cried together on her couch that night, talking through every fear, every doubt, every quiet worry we'd both been hiding. Our friendship repaired, but the damage of my misjudgment lingered. I'd proven to myself that stress could make me see enemies in the people who loved me most, but the relief of mending things with Mia was short-lived. Early the next morning, she texted me a blurry photo she'd taken from her front window. A dark sedan with no visible license plate was parked directly across the street from her townhouse, idling quietly. The driver's side window was rolled down, and a figure sat watching her house. My blood turned to ice. Sabrina was watching us. She hadn't backed off at all. She'd just been waiting, biding her time, studying my every move. Mia didn't hesitate to call the local police the second we spotted the parked sedan. By the time officers arrived, the car was gone, vanished down the quiet suburban street, leaving no trace of its presence, no license plate information, no witnesses. The officers took our statement, noted the suspicious surveillance activity, and added it to my pending restraining order case. But they could do nothing more without concrete proof of who the driver was or what their intentions were. "It's harassment," the responding officer told us gently, "but it's not actionable yet. Keep documenting every incident, every strange occurrence. Save all photos, all timestamps, all messages. It will help your case in court." After they left, Mia doubled down on protecting our space. She activated her home security cameras, locked all exterior doors and windows, and asked a neighbor who worked from home to keep an eye on her property during the day. Still, Still, neither of us could shake the feeling that we were being watched, that Sabrina was always one step ahead of us. That afternoon, digging through old cloud records to prepare evidence for the hearing, I uncovered something devastating, something that rewrote everything I thought I knew about that courtroom assault. I'd been scrolling through archived text threads from Ethan's old work phone, messages he'd forgotten to delete before he'd changed his number months prior. Buried in hundreds of mundane work texts were dozens of messages between Ethan and Sabrina, spanning months before I ever filed for divorce. Messages that proved Ethan hadn't just passively ignored Sabrina's anger, he'd actively fueled it. He'd told Sabrina I was cruel and unforgiving, that I was trapping him in a loveless marriage, that I was using my pregnancy to manipulate him financially. He'd encouraged her resentment, validated her rage, let her believe that if she fought hard enough, she could have him for good. A full week before the court hearing, he texted her, "She's going to try to take everything from me in court. Don't let her get away with it." The words burned into my screen, into my mind, into my broken heart. The courtroom slap hadn't been just Sabrina's impulsive, jealous act. It had been the direct result of Ethan's months of manipulation, his deliberate lies, his quiet encouragement of her violence. He'd set her up to attack me, then stood back and pretended to be the innocent, caught offended victim. I forwarded the entire thread to Ms. Carter immediately, my hands shaking so badly I could barely hold my phone. Within minutes, she called me, her voice sharp with urgency and triumph. "This is game-changing evidence," she said. "This completely dismantles their entire narrative. It proves Sabrina's actions weren't random or over-emotional. They were incited and enabled by Ethan. This destroys their claim that you're the hostile party, but the victory came at a steep physical cost." The emotional crash of realizing my husband had actively orchestrated danger for me and our unborn baby triggered another wave of severe stress contractions. By evening, the cramping was constant and sharp, and Mia rushed me back to the obstetric clinic for emergency monitoring. My OB pulled me aside after the exam, her expression grave. "Your stress levels are dangerously high, Lila. You're 8 months pregnant, and your body is in constant fight-or-flight mode. You're at significant risk of preterm labor. If you experience any more trauma or severe anxiety before your hearing, you could go into early labor, and your baby will need neonatal intensive care support." The fear of losing my baby, of putting my child's health at risk because of Ethan and Sabrina's cruelty, crashed over me harder than any court battle ever could. I'd been fighting for justice, but I suddenly realized justice meant nothing if I lost my baby in the process. The night before the restraining order hearing, Ethan's legal team filed a last-minute surprise submission to the court, a signed sworn statement from Sabrina herself. In it, she claimed full sole responsibility for the courtroom assault. She stated Ethan had never encouraged or pressured her, that all her anger and actions were her own, that she'd lied to herself about their relationship and acted out of misplaced jealousy. She apologized to the court, to Ethan, even to me. It was a perfect, calculated confession, one that completely cleared Ethan of all wrongdoing, right as our damning text thread evidence was set to expose him. She'd sacrificed herself to protect him, taking all the blame so he could walk away unscathed. As I stared at her formal, remorseful statement on my lawyer's screen, I understood the full depth of their toxic alliance. Sabrina was not just a mistress. She was a loyal accomplice, willing to ruin her own reputation and future to shield Ethan from accountability. And Ethan was cold enough to let her do it. The morning of the restraining order hearing arrived gray and heavy, matching the weight pressing down on my chest. I woke up sore, exhausted, and constantly aware of every small twinge in my abdomen, hypervigilant for any sign of preterm labor. My bruise had faded to a muted yellow-purple, but the emotional damage of that courtroom slap felt fresher than ever. Mia drove me to the courthouse, her grip tight on my hand the entire ride. But halfway there, she received an emergency call from her hospital. Her nursing unit was short-staffed, and she was being mandated for an emergency double shift, effective immediately. There was no way for her to reschedule, no one else to cover her position. "I'm so sorry," she whispered, tears in her eyes as she pulled over at the courthouse drop-off zone. "I have to go. I'll be back as soon as I can, I promise." I squeezed her hand, forcing a weak smile to ease her guilt. "It's okay. Go do your job. I'll be fine with my lawyer." But as I watched her car pull away, leaving me alone in front of the courthouse steps, I felt utterly abandoned. For the first time since the assault, I had no personal support, no one to hold my hand, no one to ground me through the most terrifying court hearing of my life. I was alone against Ethan's legal team, against Sabrina's calculated confession, against the entire narrative they'd built to destroy me. Inside the courtroom, the tension was thicker than it had been the day of the assault. Sabrina sat quietly at the defense table, dressed in a modest, neutral blouse, her hair pulled back neatly, her face stripped of all makeup. She looked calm, remorseful, harmless, exactly the image her legal team wanted the judge to see. Ethan sat beside her, his posture solemn and upright, playing the long-suffering, wronged husband perfectly. The hearing began with Sabrina's lawyer presenting her sworn statement, judgment, emphasizing her full accountability, her regret, her commitment to never contacting me again. He argued that she had already faced enough consequences, public shame, legal scrutiny, damage to her career, and that a permanent restraining order was excessive and punitive, unnecessary for my safety. Then Ethan's attorney spoke, painting me as the unyielding, destructive force in the situation. Ms. Marlowe is using a moment of impulsive regret to prolong litigation, create public drama, and secure unfair financial leverage in her divorce. Mr. Marlowe has consistently sought peace and compromise, only to be met with hostility and refusal. Listening to them twist the truth so seamlessly, I felt a wave of desperate hopelessness crash over me. For a split second, I hated myself for leaving my marriage. I regretted filing for divorce, for stirring up all this chaos, for putting my baby through this unimaginable stress. For a terrible, fleeting moment, I wished I could go back to the quiet, ignorant days before I knew about the affair, before the threats, the violence, the constant fear. It was my lowest point, the darkest corner of my entire journey. I'd lost my marriage, my sense of safety, my peace of mind, and now my only friend was forced to leave me to fight alone. Every part of my life felt broken beyond repair. But then Ms. Carter stepped forward, laying the months of manipulated text messages before the judge, reading Ethan's cruel, incendiary words aloud in a clear, steady voice. She presented my medical records, proof of stress-induced contractions, proof of ongoing surveillance and harassment. She dismantled their perfect narrative piece by piece, exposing Ethan's quiet cruelty and Sabrina's calculated loyalty. Watching the evidence land, watching the judge's expression shift from neutral to skeptical of Ethan's innocence, I snapped out of my spiral of regret. I realized the truth I'd been avoiding for months. My marriage hadn't broken recently. It had been broken all along. I hadn't destroyed my life by leaving Ethan. I'd saved myself and my baby from a lifetime of manipulation, lies, and danger. I abandoned every last shred of longing for reconciliation. I let go of every quiet hope that Ethan could change, that he could be the husband and father I'd once dreamed of. In that courtroom, alone and vulnerable, I found my unbreakable resolve. I would rebuild my life on my own terms. No compromises, no concessions, no more hoping for someone else to save me. The judge recessed the hearing to review all evidence fully, delaying her ruling until the following day. I left the courthouse alone, walking to my car with shaky legs, emotionally drained, but newly determined. When I arrived back at my temporary apartment, an emergency short-term rental Ms. Carter had secured for me after the surveillance incident, I found a small, plain cardboard box sitting on my doorstep. No return address, no shipping label, no note. My heart stopped. I knew without opening it that it was from Sabrina, and I knew whatever was inside would be designed to terrify me. I froze on my apartment doorstep, staring at the unmarked box like it contained a ticking bomb. My hands hovered over the cardboard top, too scared to open it, too terrified of what disturbing message Sabrina had left for me. After a long, trembling moment, I pulled out my phone and snapped photos of every side of the box, documenting every detail for my legal record. Then carefully pried the lid open. Inside was a single photograph. It was a candid shot of me, taken 3 days prior, sitting on Mia's backyard patio, resting my hands on my belly, completely unaware I was being watched. The photo was crisp, clear, taken from a close distance. Proof Sabrina had been on Mia's private property, creeping just feet away from me while I rested. Beneath the photo was a short, handwritten note in messy, shaking handwriting. "You think you're safe anywhere. You're not." I packed the box, photo and note into a sealed evidence bag immediately, my fear hardening into cold, unshakable resolve. I was done running, done hiding, done waiting for someone else to protect me. For the first time since the start of this nightmare, I stopped reacting to their attacks and started planning my counterattack. I spent the entire night organizing every piece of evidence I had accumulated over the past months, every threatening text, every surveillance photo, every medical record of my stress and prenatal distress, every manipulated text thread between Ethan and Sabrina. I sorted, labeled, and time-stamped every document, building a complete, irrefutable timeline of their harassment, manipulation, and endangerment. Ms. Carter reviewed my compiled evidence early the next morning, her tone sharp with cautious optimism. "This is solid, Lila. This proves a pattern of ongoing stalking and endangerment, not just a single impulsive act. The judge can't dismiss this as jealousy or a one-time mistake." While I built my case, the dynamic between Ethan and Sabrina finally began to fracture. Freed from the need to protect his public image in the short term, Ethan started pulling away from Sabrina, growing frustrated with her escalating, unhinged tactics. He'd wanted her to intimidate me, to pressure me into a soft divorce settlement. not to stalk me, not to leave threatening packages, not to risk criminal charges that could ruin his career permanently. Sabrina, who'd sacrificed everything to protect him in her court statement, grew desperate and angry at his distance. She'd believed her loyalty would earn her a future with him, that taking the blame would bind them closer together. Instead, it pushed him further away. I watched their rift grow through new text evidence Ms. Carter subpoenaed. Sabrina texted Ethan repeatedly, begging for reassurance, demanding commitment, accusing him of using her. Ethan's replies grew colder, shorter, more dismissive by the day. You knew the risks. Don't overstep. Fix this yourself. Their toxic, codependent alliance was unraveling from the inside, and I knew I could use that breakdown to my advantage. I didn't need mysterious connections or hidden resources to win. I just needed to let their own greed, anger, and betrayal destroy them from within. Hours before the final restraining order ruling, Sabrina texted me directly for the first time in days, her message no longer threatening or cruel, just desperate and broken. I want to talk, face to face. No lawyers, no court, no witnesses. I have things you need to know about Ethan. My first instinct was to refuse, to block her number, to avoid any further contact with the woman who'd assaulted and stalked me. But I paused, realizing this was the opening I'd been waiting for. Sabrina was hurt, betrayed, and angry at Ethan. She was ready to tell the full truth. I replied with a single, careful line. Public coffee shop midday, cameras visible. No exceptions. I knew the meeting would be risky. I knew it could be a trap, but I also knew it was my best chance to uncover Ethan's full deception, to gather the final piece of evidence I needed to secure my safety and win my case. After months of being hunted and powerless, I was finally the one in control of the next move. I chose a busy, sunlit coffee shop in the center of town for my meeting with Sabrina, a location with public security cameras, constant foot traffic, and clear sightlines in every direction. I arrived 10 minutes early, sitting at an outdoor table within full view of other patrons, my phone open, and recording audio on the table beside my drink. I was not taking any chances. Sabrina arrived alone, dressed simply, her face tired and defeated, no trace of the fiery rage that had driven her courtroom assault. She hesitated for a moment before sitting across from me, her hands folded tightly in her lap, her eyes avoiding mine. For several long seconds we sat in silence, the hum of other customers' conversations filling the space between us. When she finally spoke, her voice was quiet and raw, stripped of all anger and pretense. He used me, she said flatly. Every single part of this. He told me your marriage was dead, that you were only staying married for money, that you didn't love him or want his baby. He made me believe I was saving him, not destroying a family. I stayed calm, steady, letting her talk without interruption, capturing every word on my recording. What else did he tell you? He told me to push you harder in court, she admitted, her voice breaking. He said if you felt scared and overwhelmed, you'd settle for less. He said the baby would make you weak, that you'd choose peace over a fight. He didn't care if I upset you. He only cared about protecting his money and his job. She paused, swallowing hard before revealing the final devastating truth. He knew I'd slap you that day. He saw me getting angry before the hearing, saw me heading for you, and he didn't stop me. He let it happen because he thought it would make you look unstable, like you provoked the whole incident. The words landed heavy in my chest, confirming every terrible suspicion I'd harbored. Ethan hadn't just enabled the violence. He'd watched it unfold deliberately, using my injury and my fear as a legal tactic to weaken my case. I took all the blame for him, Sabrina whispered, tears spilling down her cheeks. I ruined my life to protect his, and he dropped me the second things got hard. He never loved me. He just used me to destroy you. I left the coffee shop meeting with a full audio confession, irrefutable proof of Ethan's manipulation and deliberate sabotage. I sent the recording directly to Ms. Carter, who immediately filed it with the court as supplemental evidence. In one calculated move, I had flipped the entire case on its head. Up until this point, Ethan had held all the power. He'd controlled the narrative, manipulated witnesses, painted me as the villain, and hidden behind Sabrina's actions. Now his entire strategy collapsed. The evidence exposed him as the mastermind behind every threat, every conflict, every moment of danger I'd endured. Ethan's legal team scrambled to recover, but there was no way to refute the recorded confession. Desperate to regain control, Ethan played his final, cruel card. He filed an emergency prenatal visitation motion, requesting formal legal access to our unborn child, claiming I was an unstable, unfit primary caregiver who might prevent him from bonding with his baby after birth. The move was ruthless, designed to pressure me into a weak settlement. He knew how desperately I wanted to protect my baby from conflict, how terrified I was of fighting over my child's future. He hoped the threat of a prolonged custody battle would break my resolve. The stress of the new filing hit me hard. That night, I experienced the strongest contractions yet, sharp and persistent enough to send me back to the clinic for monitoring. The doctor confirmed I was in early preterm labor, placing me on strict bed rest for the remainder of my pregnancy, warning me that any further legal or emotional stress could result in early delivery. I paid a steep physical price for my counterattack, but I did not regret it. The power balance had shifted irreversibly. Ethan was no longer the confident, controlling plaintiff manipulating the court. He was desperate, defensive, and running out of options. The next morning, the court issued a formal notice. All pending divorce and restraining order disputes would be resolved in a single final settlement conference in 3 days' time. The ultimate showdown was finally here. The day of the final settlement conference arrived with a quiet, heavy gravity. I arrived at the courthouse early, dressed simply. My bruise faded but visible, my body heavy with 8 months of pregnancy, my mind sharp and unyielding. Mia accompanied me this time, having adjusted her work schedule to stay by my side, her presence steady and grounding. This was the final battle. Every piece of evidence, every manipulated lie, every act of cruelty and fear would be laid bare before Judge Voss today. There would be no more delays, no more hidden tactics, no more calculated manipulation. The truth would finally come out. Inside the closed courtroom, the atmosphere was taut and silent. Ethan sat rigidly at the defense table, his usual calm composure gone, his jaw tight, his eyes flickering with unspoken anxiety. Sabrina was not present. Her legal team had advised her to avoid the final conference to prevent further self-incrimination, leaving Ethan alone to face the consequences of his choices. Ms. Carter opened the conference by presenting our full body of evidence, the months of incendiary text messages, the surveillance photos, the threatening package, my medical prenatal distress records, and the full audio confession from Sabrina's coffee shop interview. She laid out Ethan's complete pattern of manipulation, proving beyond doubt that he had fueled Sabrina's violence, orchestrated the courtroom conflict, and deliberately endangered me and my unborn child for legal leverage. Ethan's lawyer attempted to salvage his case, arguing that Sabrina's confession was biased, that her claims were retaliatory, that there was no concrete proof Ethan had intended harm. But his arguments sounded weak and hollow against the mountain of irrefutable evidence. When given the chance to speak for himself, Ethan finally dropped his perfect, remorseful husband act. His tone turned sharp, bitter, and unapologetic. "I made a mistake having an affair," he admitted flatly, "but this entire escalation is her fault. She refused to settle amicably, refused to let us move on peacefully. I was only protecting my reputation and my future." His words confirmed everything I'd learned about him. He was incapable of taking true responsibility, incapable of empathy, incapable of prioritizing anyone or anything above his own self-interest. He would never change. He would never be a safe partner or a reliable father. When the floor opened for my statement, I stood slowly, my hand resting firmly on my belly, my voice steady and unshaking. "I did not start this conflict," I told the judge, looking directly at her, refusing to glance at Ethan. "I filed for a peaceful, fair divorce after discovering my husband's infidelity. I only fought back when my safety, my health, and my baby's life were deliberately endangered. I do not seek punishment. I seek protection, for myself and for my child." I laid out my final, non-negotiable terms: a permanent restraining order against Sabrina, full legal primary custody of my baby, supervised only visitation for Ethan post-birth, a fair division of marital assets prioritizing prenatal and postnatal medical costs, and a formal court ruling documenting Ethan's role in the harassment and endangerment. Judge Voss reviewed all evidence carefully for a long, quiet moment, her gaze sweeping over Ethan with unmissable disapproval. When she finally spoke, her ruling was clear, decisive, and uncompromising. "The court finds clear and convincing evidence of ongoing harassment, endangerment, and deliberate manipulation by Mr. Marlowe and Ms. Hale against Ms. Marlowe during her high-risk pregnancy," she stated firmly. "A permanent restraining order against Sabrina Hale is granted indefinitely. Mr. Marlowe's prenatal visitation motion is denied. Post-birth visitation will be strictly supervised, limited, and contingent on consistent, respectful behavior." She ordered Ethan to cover all my legal fees, all prenatal medical stress-related costs, and awarded me primary physical and legal custody of my child. She formalized the divorce proceedings with a fault-based ruling, cementing Ethan's harmful conduct as the official cause of our marriage's end. Ethan's face paled as the ruling landed. Every manipulative tactic, every lie, every cruel choice had finally caught up to him. He had lost control, lost leverage, lost his perfect public image, and lost the ability to harm me further. The core conflict was finally resolved. I had won my safety, my freedom, and my child's protection. But as the courtroom adjourned and the bailiffs closed the case file, I felt no triumphant joy, only quiet, exhausted relief. The battle was over, but the scars remained, and I knew one final quiet challenge waited for me: rebuilding my life and healing from everything I'd endured. In the weeks following the final court ruling, life settled into a quiet, fragile peace. The constant stress, The endless legal battles, the lurking fear of surveillance and violence finally faded away. Sabrina abided strictly by the permanent restraining order, vanishing entirely from our lives, no longer reaching out, no longer watching, no longer threatening. Ethan accepted the court's terms, no longer filing frivolous motions, no longer attempting to manipulate or contact me outside of formal, lawyer-mediated communication. I moved into a small, sunny single-family rental home in a quiet, safe suburban neighborhood, far from my old marital home and the courthouse chaos. Mia helped me unpack, decorate the nursery, and stock the house with everything I needed for my baby's arrival, her support unwavering and constant now that the crisis had passed. My body slowly healed from the stress of the past months. The contractions stopped, my vitals stabilized, and my doctor cleared me for a safe, full-term delivery. The bruise on my cheek faded completely, leaving no physical mark, but the emotional scars remained, soft and tender, a permanent reminder of how quickly my safe, ordinary life had shattered. I processed the cost of my victory slowly, in quiet moments alone. I had won my freedom and my safety, but the battle had not been free. I'd lost my marriage, my trust in romantic love, my belief in the quiet, stable future I'd once planned. I'd endured trauma, fear, and isolation no pregnant person should ever have to face. My baby would enter the world into a broken family, without the two-parent home I'd once dreamed of giving them. There was no perfect fairy tale ending here. No grand reconciliation, no dramatic redemption, no easy fix. There was only honest human healing, slow, messy, and real. Ethan reached out once, privately, after the ruling, with no lawyers, no demands, no manipulation. His message was short and uncharacteristically honest. "I'm sorry for everything. I know I can't fix it. I'll do better for our baby." I didn't reply. I didn't need to forgive him, didn't need to reconcile, didn't need to give him closure. My closure came from building my own peace, from protecting my child, from choosing myself for the first time in my adult life. Forgiveness was not required for my healing. Safety was. On a calm, quiet morning, 3 weeks after the final court hearing, I went into full-term labor. Mia sat beside me in the hospital room, holding my hand through every contraction, cheering me on as I brought my baby girl into the world. When I held her small, warm body against my chest for the first time, all the fear, all the pain, all the chaos of the past months melted away. She was perfect, healthy, and calm, proof that I had fought hard enough, endured long enough, and protected her through every storm, all the sacrifice, all the